Hi, everyone, and welcome to Box Outside the Box. Sorry, Brian, still weird for me to say that even.
I know. Well, yeah, we just recently changed over our podcast. We overhauled our podcast. Used to be the Live Off Rents podcast, and today we've expanded it to talk more about just unconventional financial advice in general. And Jenny and I were talking just before we hit the record button about like, oh, is it unconventional enough to talk about how renting is often the smarter financial choice? But there's a saying that I think kind of says it all here that the saying goes that the poor buy things, right? They buy possessions. The middle class buys houses, and the rich buy income streams in order to buy back their time. And I think way too many middle class Americans just unthinkingly assume that, oh, home ownership is the path to wealth, or that's the American dream, and that's what I need to do if I'm going to like make it in this world, at least financially. And we want to push back on that assumption today. So I've been a renter, I've been a homeowner, I have owned nearly 2 dozen rental properties in my adult life. I rent my own home. Denny, I mean, I know you've been all of the above as well.
Oh my goodness, I've rented, I've owned homes, invested in many, and also now invest passively in a whole bunch of different things. But I'm also a realtor and for over 30 years, and I've managed large apartment communities and small multi. So
Yeah, so without further ado, let's dive into some of the perks of renting that just get lost in this conversation where people are just assuming, oh, I need to buy a house. I should buy a house. That's the right thing to do. It's not necessarily the right thing to do, especially not for everybody. So some of the perks of renting, one, you get to outsource and delegate all of the maintenance. That
right.
is both the headaches and the costs of maintaining a property. So I haven't owned my own home for a decade now. I moved abroad about a decade ago, and I haven't lifted a finger to mow a lawn or fix a leaky faucet in a decade. And it's been great. It's been awesome. And Denny, I know you can't say the same thing as a homeowner.
No, as a matter of fact, our hot water tank has sprung a leak and we're dealing with that right now. So, I mean, it's calling a plumber and the whole nine yards. So, yeah, it's different.
Just by sheer coincidence, we are also having issues with our hot water heater right now. It's an on the fly heater. And the sum total of the work that we did for that is texted the landlord. That's what we did. So yeah, it just goes to show that that outsourcing that work and that cost, that is meaningful. Second, consistency in your monthly housing costs. As a renter, you don't get these big surprise $5,000 expenses for things like, oh my God, I have to repair or replace the roof, or I have to replace the furnace or the hot water heater, or oh my God, I've got a foundation problem at my property. It's going to cost me thousands of dollars. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Yeah. So as a
Increase in
homeowner,
insurance.
yeah, insurance, exactly. So as a homeowner, you have to budget extra every single month for those unexpected repair bills, maintenance costs, etc., not knowing when they're going to hit you. As a renter, you can budget much easier. All you have to budget for is the rent, and that's your total housing expense. So that consistency, that easier budgeting is a perk of renting. Flexibility. Renters can move at any time, or at least within the terms of their lease. But you can take a month to month lease if you want, even more flexibility to leave at any time.
Right.
Or yeah, you can rent for 6 months or a year or 18 months or whatever. You can leave and move. You can get up and go at any time. And that's not just moving houses. That's also moving cities, moving states, moving countries. Like I mentioned, I've lived abroad for a decade now. We've lived in 3 countries in that time.
Right. And it's nice too because it gives you the chance maybe to escape cold weather and go into the warm weather for a while or something like that. So there is that flexibility.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because that is an element of this flexibility that not enough people talk about. That ability to snowbird, right? To split your time between 2 different cities or 2 different states or 2 different countries every year without having to pay double. So my parents, for example, they just got back from spending a month in Florida. It's cold right now as we're recording this. They spent a month in Florida and they loved it. But they had to pay for 2 housing bills during that time because they own their home in Baltimore where they spend most of the year. And then they had to pay duplicate housing for that month that they spent in Florida. And a lot of snowbirds do that. When you
Mhm.
rent, you can rent for you can sign a 6 month lease, in the winter time in Florida, for example, and a 6 month lease in Baltimore for this other example in the warmer months, or, whatever you want to do. There's just examples, but that flexibility is incredibly valuable, and not enough people really appreciate that flexibility. You also get access to community amenities as a renter, or at least you can get access to community amenities like a pool, a hot tub, a sauna, a gym, a business space or co-working space. Even like some apartment complexes have movie theaters or event spaces. And you can have affordable access to all these things because you're splitting them effectively with every other renter in the building. So each
Right.
person is paying a very small percentage towards these, and it gives you access to all these amenities that are very difficult to have access to as a homeowner, at least within your home building. I mean, obviously you can buy a condo, and some condos have access to these things, but then you have to mess around with the condo association and condo association fees, and how well run is the condo association? Is someone skimming off the top of the condo association? You just run into all these other headaches that you don't have as a renter.
So true.
You also don't have a down payment. Coming up with a down payment is a huge barrier to home ownership for a lot of people. In many cases, tens of thousands of dollars. You don't have to worry about that as a renter. So I'm actually planning on moving back to the US in just a few months from now. And my wife was asking the question like, "Oh, should we think about buying?" And I was like, "Well, yes, we should think about it as an option, but we're going to have to pull like 50, 60 grand out of our investments probably in order to put that as a cash down payment." Yeah, it's money that will no longer be working for us the same way that our investments do. I mean, in our co-investing club, we aim to earn 15% plus returns on our investments. We are not going to be earning anywhere close to a return on that if we put that as a down payment on a house. I mean,
Right.
maybe that house will appreciate by 3% a year, 4% a year if we're lucky, but it's not the
Renting
same.
also gives you a chance to try out neighborhoods.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And that's something that, especially if you're moving to a new city, a new country, a new state, it takes time to get to know a new city and to get to know the neighborhoods and where you want to live. So
Right.
you being able to rent for a while, that ties back to that flexibility of being able to move on your schedule when you feel like it. Homeowners have to worry about something called the break-even horizon because it takes years for homeowners to reach a point where they can break even by selling the house. And the reason for that is that you have two rounds of closing costs to get in and out of a house. You have the purchase closing costs and you have the selling closing costs. And these are tens of thousands of dollars when you add them together. And it takes years for a house to appreciate in value enough to cover those two rounds of closing costs.
Mm.
So, that break even horizon, that timeline for how long it takes you to break even on a home, it's different for every market, but it's years, right? It could be as little as like 2 years, for example, or it could be 10 years. But as a renter, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about this whole notion of break even horizon. How long do I have to live in this house? How long am I chaining myself to this house before I can move again? You don't have to worry about that as a renter. You also don't have to worry about debt. I mean, mortgage debt is hundreds of thousands of dollars for the typical homeowner. I'm debt free right now. I have no debt at all. No mortgage debt, no car debt, no credit card debt, no student debt. I don't have any debt. And it feels really freeing to not have any debt. With debt, you also comes the risk of becoming upside down on your home. And
Mm.
Denny, I mean, you and I lived through the Great Recession and the housing crash of 2008. And a lot of people were upside down on their homes and on
Yeah.
investment properties. I myself was upside down on some investment properties. It's a terrible feeling. I mean, you are locked in to owning that property or taking a loss on selling it. It's not fun at all.
No, and when you grow up like I grew up and it was like a sure thing, you are gonna make money and you buy a home. That was quite a surprise.
It's a fallacy. It's a
Hmm.
myth. It's a myth in finance that real estate always goes up in value. It does not. It usually goes up in value, but it's not just a straight up and to the right graph, right? I mean, it bounces up and down. So, you don't have to worry about that as a renter. And one final thought here, and Denny, you might have a couple of thoughts of your own to add, but one objection to renting that I often hear, especially from people who are a little further along in their personal finance education, they say, "Oh, well, I really want a house hack. I want to live for free
Mm.
by house hacking." And we love that. We are all about house hacking. We are all about knocking out your housing payment so that you can put all that money towards savings and investments. But here's the thing, you don't have to own a home in order to house hack. I have a friend of mine who she does own her own home now, but she used to rent. She rented a two-story apartment, and the top story of this apartment was a bedroom bathroom suite. And she used to rent out that bedroom bathroom suite as a renter. She would rent it on Airbnb, and she found that if she was able to rent out that bedroom bathroom suite for 2 long weekends a month, it covered almost her entire for the month.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, so she was able to house hack as a renter. So you
Or
can,
you can do what I did, which is I took in an international student, which was really fun. And you can do that when you're renting.
that is a great
And
point.
yes, and that just that you would end up making money with a rental.
Yeah, so just for anyone who's not familiar with that concept, some foreign exchange student placement services will pay a monthly stipend to the host for hosting the foreign exchange student. Denny did this, and it covered basically your entire mortgage payment, right?
Yeah, it was great. And it was the best experience. I mean, I still talk to our son, as I call him, our Chinese son, and it was an awesome experience. But it's a great way, and you can definitely do that when you're renting.
Yeah, and you can even, this is something that just occurred to me as we were having this conversation. You can do rental arbitrage where you go out and you sign a long-term lease on a
Mm,
property, and then you turn around and you rent that property out on Airbnb or as a midterm rental to things like, or people like travel nurses or other, corporate travelers who want to stay somewhere for an extended stay, but they want to stay at a hotel because they're going to be living there for a couple months. So you can do this rental arbitrage where you're earning a margin every month. You're earning more on the property as a short-term rental or a midterm rental than what you're paying as a long-term rental for that house or apartment or whatever it is.
right.
You can do this without having to buy the property, without having to come up with a down payment or tie up any of your money in it. So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of reasons to love renting. It is not throwing money away. Stop assuming that you have to buy a house to say that you've made it in the middle class or made it in life as in success. There are a lot of wealthy people who rent, and
Right.
I myself rent. I have owned homes, and I'll tell you one really quick story about the house that I owned and lived in. When I bought it, so it had a rooftop deck overlooking this beautiful marina in Baltimore's Inner Harbor, and there was a hot tub on the rooftop deck. So I buy the property, and I knew that the hot tub was not in good repair, but I was like, oh, I'll just fix it. I'll just send a hot tub repairman out there to fix it. Sent the repairman out, couldn't fix it, was not salvageable, not fixable. So I ended up I bought a new hot tub, but the thing weighed like 2,000 pounds.
Mm.
I mean, I had to hire this crew and like borrow a crane and like do all this crazy
Oh
stuff.
my
And
God.
and then the crew was they had to put the hot tub on the front part of my roof that was not part of the deck that was reinforced. And my wife, who was then my girlfriend, she was sitting right underneath that in the room, right underneath this flat roof. And
Oh
I didn't know
no.
if the roof was actually going to support this hot tub or not. I come running up the steps, I was like, Katie, get out of there, get out of this room,
Oh,
And anyway, I did eventually get that hot tub up on the roof, and it was great and it was wonderful, but it was a huge pain in the ass. And then eventually, I kept that property as a rental when I moved abroad. And then I come home to find out that someone had built up their house, that had added on to their house that was in front of mine and totally blocked my water view of that beautiful marina, which was
oh.
the whole reason why I bought that house in the first place. So the house lost like 100 grand in value because it lost its water view. And anyway, it's just goes to show you that owning a house, it can be fun, it can be great, and it can also be a mess. It can be a total mess and a lot of stress as well. Yeah, no more rhymes. I mean it. Anybody want a peanut?
He didn't.
Well, come on. Everyone likes the Princess Bride. All right. So, anyway, on that note, Denny, is there anything else that we should cover before we call this episode complete?
No, I just think that everybody, a lot of people, especially investors, will look down on renting a home. And I do think that there are definite positives in renting. It's good to know that and keep that in mind.
Yeah, and you can invest in real estate without owning your own home. I mean, I own an interest in over 3,000 units across the country, and I still rent the house or the apartment where I live. So, these are not mutually exclusive. You can own real estate, you can invest in real estate passively like we do. I mean, that's what our co-investing club does every month. We get together and we vet these big private equity real estate
Right.
deals. Then we go in on them together so that each person can invest 5 grand or more, way less than you would typically need to invest in these. And that's how I personally invest in real estate. And it's fun. It's great. And I don't
And
have
no
any of
more
the headaches.
calls. Right.
Yeah,
Hello.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, anyway, if you got a fresh perspective out of this quick episode, please pay it forward, pass it along to a friend or family member, subscribe to our channel. And if you didn't get anything out of this episode, tell us why. Support at sparkfunnel.com. And lastly, consider joining our co-investing club. Like we were
Yeah,
saying, we meet every month to vet these deals.
absolutely. And regardless, stay weird, unconventional investor you.
Amen.